turn, I'm kind of end up more talking about sustainable practices and really how things are just taught. So in this exhibit, we really just focus on albacore, tuna, chinook salmon, pink shrimp, and Dungeness crab. These are not by any means the only fisheries in Oregon. These are some of sort of either the larger ones or the ones that people sort of most know about. We have some other fisheries that are really substantial and significant in Oregon that we actually don't talk about at all in any of these exhibits. So these are just some examples of fisheries, not the only ones that we have. And I guess as I go through this, just sort of ask some questions. I'm trying to sort of come at it from what you guys might be asked, or kind of some stories you can tell, or that kind of stuff. If there's specific things you want to know, feel free to ask away. So starting with albacore, tuna, and chinook salmon, we have the Gal, which is a local vessel. Actually, used to be my dad's vessel, not anymore though. So that's a model of a trawler, which are a lot of times the smaller vessels that people will see tied up at Port Dock 5 and 7 are the trawlers, the real small ones. They catch salmon and tuna, hook and line. So not with nets, they're a hook and line boat. How it works is that these outriggers are troll poles. They're two words. They come down like this when they're fishing. And as you kind of follow your eye to the spools, the lines are actually attached to those troll poles. And so they troll those poles through the water as the vessel is sort of slowly moving. And so for albacore, they go about 6 knots, which is 1 knot is 1.1 miles. And for salmon, they go about 3 knots. It varies a little bit. So pretty, not super fast, pretty slowly. They'll troll those through the waters. And there's multiple lines at one time.
Those lines each have to be baited, or is there like
yeah, how they bait them? Yeah, and so there's actually several hooks on each line. They don't bait them, usually. What they use, how many of you are like recreational salmon fishermen? Have you been like, or just recreational fishing in general? None of you? Oh my God. Sorry to be sexist. I'm looking at the two men here like, really? One of you. So if you ever have gone, or go to England Marine Supply sometime and just walk around. For salmon, they'll use these big things called flashers. Do we have some? There we go. So it's basically almost like a mirror, not quite a mirror. It's about this big, and they're on the line, and then below that is a barbless hook with some type of sort of vaguely squid-looking creature on it. They're like plastic. Some will have feathers. Some will be plastic. Some will have sort of some lead on them. They're just different little things. Anyways, so the spinner will do this. The flasher will do this, kind of move around, and that's going to create some flashing sensation. And it also spins that little hoochie thing. And so it's going to be doing this, which creates interest, from the fish. For albacore, they use about the same method, but they don't use the flasher, and they go faster. So that's kind of what they use for bait.
So bait is a solid object that's on the line all the time. It's not live bait that you
No,
put
it's
on
not
each
live
time.
bait.
It's just fake, yeah.
It's fake stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're like, all the fishermen have very different, like unique hoochies and feathers and stuff that they use. And, kind of their favorite ones or whatever. Some swear by the green ones, and others swear by the red ones, and some swear by the ones with feathers, and some don't. So it's all just, just like with recreational people, they all have their favorite stuff to use. Let's see here. Yeah, so barbless hooks, I think that's kind of an important conservation thing to mention. The hooks don't have barbs on them. And the reason they don't, it actually started sort of in the salmon fishery, because a lot of times we were trying to go catch coho or chinook, but then you catch the other one. And so the mortality rate on the other species of salmon is much less. If you have a barbless hook, it's not messing up their mouth as much. Because that barb gets like sort of caught in their lip, and you gotta like rip their lip up to get it out. So the barbless hook can slip out much easier.
Is that what you use on catch and release too?
Yes, on catch and release, generally you use a barbless hook. Yeah, I mean sometimes people catch things with the barb hook and throw them back, but they do much better if you don't have a barb. And so they do that with tuna as well. They use a barb. The other sort of side benefit that has is that the fish, as they go to market, this is especially important for direct sales, people that sell tuna off the boat, and also for salmon, which is like about $4 a pound right now for salmon is what the fishermen get. the quality of fish is much nicer because their face isn't lift up. And so when they're going to a whole market where that whole fish is sold, the fish with the beat up lip just doesn't look as nice and isn't going to get the price. So decided to do that. Also, kind of in this exhibit is a little bit of information on Project Cruise, which is the collaborative research for Oregon Ocean salmon. It's basically salmon fishermen taking genetic samples of the species that they catch, of the salmon that they catch, and so that scientists can use that to find out the salmon's native stream, so where the salmon was born. So we have a little kit which has some garbage in it, which needs to be cleaned out. Mark, there's garbage in here.
I notice it's dusty.
Yeah, it's hard to dust.
So there's some stuff in there, and that project has been going on 6 or 7 years now, and it is actually coast-wide, Oregon and Washington and California. So it happens all up and down the coast. Yeah, there is.
Yeah, scissors.
Paper towels.
Scissors and paper towels.
Yeah. So questions about albacore or salmon?
I guess, Katie, tell them what sustainable actually means. I mean, this is all sustainable. What does that actually mean?
Well, so it sort of depends on who you ask, but how we define it in this exhibit is simply that the species is managed or set up in a way where it can sort of keep going. The fishery is going to keep going. So that we feel, as scientists, we know enough about that species and the harvest methods and all of that, that the seafood, you eating the seafood and the fishermen catching it is not putting the species at risk. So that's how we define it in this exhibit. Like I said, it's different depending on who you ask and what agency you go to, but that's how we define it.
That's why the season limits, you hear guys talking about limits, and they change a lot. So every time they go into a sample, they redo the limit. And they either up it or lower it or close it.
Or sometimes, like in salmon, and I just found this out actually, sometimes in salmon they'll close it for a week so they can keep up with the data of how many were caught and then redetermine. So the salmon season is actually one that as the summer and fall, spring, summer, and fall sort of roll along, it's constantly being adjusted. So it was open, totally open at the beginning of the summer for commercial fisheries and for coho. And then they closed it, and now it's 100 fish a week. And then it will just keep adjusting as they see how many come in.
So fishermen must get, or women must get automatic email notifications or something?
No. Some of them do. If you sign up for that service, you do. A lot of times, actually, it's just sort of word of mouth with how it spreads, radios and stuff.
Yeah, and that weird wild. I was thinking the same thing. We were down there, and the guy says, yeah, I can catch 100 fish a week until they close it or change it. And I'm thinking, well, you show up to work every day, and what do you expect? You don't know what to expect, really.
You go to Sheely Marine Supply and have a cup of coffee, and you find out what it was. So, anyways, any more questions about tuna or salmon?
And there's 2 videos on this screen. One is how to buy a tuna at the docks, and the other one is what does a shrimp boat look like, and the captain kind of takes you through their process.
So moving on to shrimp. So this is a trawler. Trawlers use nets. Where did that go? Oh, it fell down. We need the net fell down. In the hopper.
Oh, cool.
So it needs to come out. So anyways, our net's lost.
She knows it.
Our net's lost.
Yeah.
Oh,
Good thing she's here, huh?
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, much better.
My intern Ruby went to great lengths to figure out how to make a model shrimp net with an excluder on it. So, anyway, so trawlers have nets.
It's a hairnet.
It is a hairnet. Yeah. She made an excluder for it.
She did.
Which I thought was
Yeah,
pretty
that's
cool.
That's right.
Yes. The shrimp boats we mostly have an organ or double rig, meaning they actually fish 2 nets at once, which in most other trawl fisheries that doesn't happen, so it's kind of unique. So they would have 2 of these nets. Pretty cool piece of sustainability here, which is this excluder right here. So animals, that's the mouth of the net back that way. Animals come in and get caught. Shrimp and other things that are on the bottom, so like halibut, they get caught a lot, Dover sole, that kind of stuff. They all make it back to the excluder or the grate. Bigger animals like this halibut here can't get out, or can't get through, excuse me, and so they usually kind of flap around and find their way out near the hole, whereas the shrimp can pass right through the grate, no problem. So, a neat piece of a sustainability equipment, and really started making us think differently about nets and about trawl gear. Started making people realize that you can actually make trawl gear to be selective, which means sort of targeting one species, whereas before nets were always viewed as something that were unselected. So this really changed not just the shrimp fishery, but sort of our whole perspective about nets. And so now there's been lots of work done right out of Newport with our local net chef, Bellwether Trawl, and making other types of nets more sustainable and selective. This is the easiest excluder to explain. There's lots and lots of other ones that are really hard. If any of you did the Working Waterfront docent training, we went down to Sarah's shop. Some of those are really complicated, sort of intricate excluders that are like really long that go inside the net. This one's kind of the easiest one to explain, so that's a good one to start with for visitors. And generally speaking, the research we did on this exhibit, just people never see this.
They don't look up.
No.
Now, I have to say, once we lowered it and turned it this way, which is not how it would look in the water, it would be straight. But we turned it, we got about 23% more people to look up once we turned it, so it's the best we can do without having it, like, you know,
Hitting
to get
people.
under it, you know, so which we thought about.
Appear with an arrow.
Yeah, we thought about that too, actually. We put some signs on the floor. We actually only realized that kids are really the only ones that saw them.
Oh,
So how are the public going to know about that?
You're
If you
gonna
point
to
it
them.
out.
that's
yeah.
right.
Who's going to point to it?
You.
If you.
You.
You
point it
don't
out.
get to come back here.
No,
You're gonna
we're
come
talking
back.
about how wintertime you
It's
got
gonna be
time.
Yeah, right.
So maybe you could make this like a human excluder net, so that, you know, the kids can come through it or something.
And science
We're talking about doing the family area with a little boat with an excluder that kids can crawl through and be excluded. So
Well, that net that's out there now, I can get under that thing all the time.
I'm sure. The turtleneck.
The turtle one.
Lots of pictures.
yeah, turtleneck came down. It belongs to the aquarium. They wanted it back.
How long have these been used?
Excluders? Probably about 15 years or so.
Not as long as you think it would have. So now it's all fish biology that dictates this. So all the biologists looking at fish behavior, they have a piece of the story. The net guy has a piece of the story, or net lady.
Fishermen do, yeah.
And everybody kind of came together to say, hey, you know what? We've all got the information that actually would make this work.
And this was actually a Canadian. The Canadians originally came up with this. And then Seagrin actually paid for the Canadian fishermen to come down and do some workshops in Oregon. And the Oregon fishermen were like, no, effing way, I'm never using that in my net, blah, blah, blah. Well, a couple of them used it, and it, you know, was like a miracle. They weren't sorting stuff. They weren't
Labor
sorting
waste,
stuff, you know. It's a lot
fine
easier.
waste, bycatch
So
waste.
now we have this, and actually this is a lot different than it used to be. So it's been around for 15 years or so. Originally, just some people used it, and then everybody used it. And now it's regulation. Now the grades have actually gotten smaller. We had some concern about Pacific smelt for a while, which were slipping through. They're just little guys. So now the grades are just like, I don't even really know how shrimp fit through them, but they do. So it's been modified and changed. It's been experimented with. It's still active. If we have issues with smaller shrimp some years or something, my guess is they'll keep adjusting it. So, other questions? Oh, nets. So this was basically an add-on to the exhibit just to get people to sort of stay here longer. It's an activities for the kids. The one thing I hate about this, and I've been told we can't fix it, is that these nets are actually hanging upside down. So this, when you see this here, this is the cotton. That actually would close. The way Sarah built them is that this is the bottom. It would actually sit shut. So anyways, they are sort of hanging upside down, but essentially they're just sort of pieces of nets to get people to look about the mesh size. So mesh size is measured from the knot to the knot, knot to the knot, knot to the knot. And so this is regulated in different fisheries. So different fisheries, and by fishery just means the species or species you're trying to catch, or have rules about how big this can be or how small it can be. So here it says, here's a picture of a shrimp trawler. Mesh size is really little. You know, what do I catch? Big shrimp. This one, what do I catch? The mesh size here is actually a bit smaller than that. And this is specific whiting. And largest mesh size, and this is a basically round fish. So we put a sand dab in here because we couldn't really find a picture of 23 different species that include groundfish. It really makes sense. So we went with kind of one. We've got sort of one species, but they catch variety. This type of net catches a variety of groundfish, not just that particular one. So.
Do you know who does processing for shrimp that's brought in? Do we have a processing plant? in
We do.
Port?
So Pacific Shrimp does a lot of shrimp here. Bornstein's does some as well. Most shrimp actually gets processed in Charleston. Shrimp that is landed in Oregon gets processed in Charleston. But we do still process it here. You can still smell it. You can still see the shrimp shells, dropping into the truck and stuff on the bayfront. So
Yeah.
it's not that we don't process it, just the bulk of it is actually done in Charleston.
Those are just the shells that are dumping in the.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
really?
that thing that the truck drives under and all that. Yeah, those are the shells. That's the waste product after they deshell the shrimp.
Oh, they look like the tiny little. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. Those are them. Yeah,
Just the skeleton. Yeah.
yeah, those are the skeleton.
What happens to the waste?
A lot of it actually goes up to Bio Oregon. A lot of it goes up to a place called Bio Oregon in Astoria where they make it into like fish fertilizer and sort of fish protein pellets or seafood protein pellets for like fish farms.
Don't they use it as fertilizer in the valley a lot? Those
Yeah,
crops,
so they
yeah.
make it into the fertilizer sections. Yeah, and the whole processing piece. So generally speaking, how this type of shrimp is processed is it's brought in. It actually soaks in a phosphate for about 12 to 16 hours, which makes the shell sort of softer. It actually makes the shrimp themselves, they're dead by this point, absorb a lot of water, and then they're sent through peelers. So that's how we sort of
Because they want a whole meat product. So
Not
the
little
shell is
bits.
soft, and if it goes through hard, it breaks the shrimp into components. And nobody wants that. So
Well-
it's mostly about how attractive it is and how valuable it is.
Yeah, and also, so it sits there in a phosphate and absorbs water, and it also makes them able to charge you more.
It's
They
heavier.
go 4 pounds, yeah. Yeah, so if you ever had shrimp not soaked in the phosphate, it tastes really different. My more recent experience. So, shrimp, other questions? Okay. So moving on to crab, I think most people probably can associate with this piece more than they can the other ones because a lot of them have been recreational crabbing or have seen it done. So this is about 2/3 of a commercial crab pot. So these are not like your little crab rings that you just carry. These are like really heavy. Even before you get crabs in them, they're a couple hundred pounds without crabs in them. And part of the reason they're so heavy is that they stay where you put them. Because if you drop them and they're not very heavy, the ocean just moves them around. The ocean still moves them around even though they're heavy. So for those of you that haven't been crabbing, sort of how this works is they put bait into the crab pot. We have a bait box, which is that white kind of thing in there. A lot of times they'll use hanging bait as well, which is basically just like a big clip, like a paper clip. They'll just kind of stab a fish through the eye or something and clip it on here. And then put some squid or sometimes they use mink carcass or octopus in that bait container. The crabs, go in through the tunnels. There's one on each side. Once they get in, they can't get back out. And then smaller crabs that aren't sort of the legal size can get out through one of 2 escape rings. So here's the escape rings right here, so they can crawl out through there. The other kind of neat thing on here is this white piece. It's called rotten cotton. We did have a tag on it. I don't know where it went, but this actually will come apart in about 40, 60 days, something like that. Kind of depends on how tight on there it is. Sometimes it's this piece that is rotten cotton. Sometimes it is a piece of mesh they make. And so the salt water basically eats at this and eventually it will come apart. And then if this pot is like lost or something, the ocean carries it away. While crabs will still essentially crawl in and out of the pot, it's not ghost fishing because everything can get out because the lid will not be tied down.
Does that influence when the rubber stuff comes off? Because we find oodles of the rubber on.
Oh, the rubber bands? Yeah. This and this aren't, this will come apart quicker than this will. A lot of times these are actually lost on the deck of the boat.
Just moving around and scraping against stuff, they break.
Well, and they just leave them laying on
Well,
the
and
boat.
this
Yeah.
is wrapped, this is metal inside here, and it's wrapped to keep it from corroding and not scraping against the vessel. This stuff just comes off eventually. It gets fatigued and brittle.
Yeah, and even in here you can see that this is starting to come apart just from the tension on it. So, yeah, but this will break apart far quicker than the rubber will, but it does break. Other things on this crab pot, we have a temperature sensor. So not every crabber, but a lot of crabbers in Oregon actually put scientific gear on their crab pots as part of sort of a collaborative research project with OSU. So this is a little temperature logger called a tidbit. It doesn't provide real-time data, so the fisherman actually doesn't know what the bottom temperature is at the time they're doing it. They kind of give it back to the scientists and they figure it out. The other thing, and only very few fishermen have this, is a dissolved oxygen meter. So again, a collaborative process with scientists. Very few fishermen have these because they're expensive, because they take up a room in the crab pot, as you can see. And also there's a lot of sort of work, extra work the fisherman has to do, because they have to do more logging and stuff and keep track of that specific pot. Whereas these, they don't need logging because they're a temperature sensor. The scientists can easily see that crab pot when it hits the surface. So they don't really need to sit there and log out when it's coming up and all that. And this requires more effort. And so at the peak of crab season, very few people want to spend time sort of doing that, babysitting basically. But some of them do have it.
What they're doing hypoxia research with that. Just what kind of oxygen levels are at the bottom and where the
Yeah.
pockets are. And
Yeah.
the neat thing is how many scientific vessels go out. There's like 2 or 3 that can deploy, 50 instruments? If they do this collaborative process, they have the entire commercial effort putting instrumentation on all over.
Yeah.
So it's neat.
It's a neat
Do
project.
they subsidize those?
Occasionally there's grant money to incent some of that.
They originally they paid fishermen loosely for their time, but it didn't really calculate out, especially with this guy, because the time lost putting pots in the water during that peak season is, thousands of dollars an hour, tens of thousands of dollars an hour. So it didn't really work. So this guy more came down to the fishermen that wanted to.
And there are fishermen who enjoy being part of the scientific
Yeah.
process.
Actually, there's a lot of them that do these. It's easy for them, and they don't. If they lose one, they don't feel that bad. It's $100, so it's not. This also has some guilt factor if your crab pot walks away on you or something. They feel bad. But other things. So this right here is really important piece of equipment. So commercial fishermen are regulated on how many crab pots they can have. You can't just fish as many as you want. It had to do with historical catch and vessel size that came up with that number. So they're issued these every year, so many tags depending on their vessel. And they don't get them back till 2/3 through the season. They can file a lost tag claim. So if you lose a bunch of pots in the beginning of the season, you're just like out until 2/3 of the season, and you can say, I've lost my tags. So these are really important. In fact, if visitors ever find these on the beach, I always tell them to return them to ODF and W, or just bring them here and you guys can walk them over, because if one of these comes in that season, the fisherman will be able to reuse it and actually, fish again with that tag. So pretty important piece. This one's from 08 and 09, so we're not keeping them as shell end from fishing in the pot. So the other thing too is an ID tag. So this is actually not accurate of where it's located. It's usually sort of clipped on to the mesh. So this is just if we have a lost pot that comes up without a buoy or something, we'll know whose pot it is. This isn't regulated through ODF and W. This is tag. It's utilities. Each vessel has a color pattern kind of to their buoy that they use. That's not regulated either. It's just so they can tell whose gear is what as they're driving around. Kind of a more interesting story I always like to kind of tell people is sort of like how they lay their gear. I mean, how they do it. And so typically they run crab gear, so we're talking single pots with buoys at the surface. They usually run them in a in a kind of north-south or south-north orientation, so they're kind of following the coastline. And so they lay what they call strands of gear, which usually is, at least 12, 15 pots, sometimes 30 or more, sort of in a line. And they call it a string or a strand. So then if Becca lays hers like this, then the next guy would come and lay an additional row, and then you would come and lay your additional row. And sort of that's the gentleman's agreement, is that you all lay in that orientation, you just follow. So that way you're not getting gear as tangled and messed up, and you can kind of move in between the rows and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, could you imagine having everybody just...
That's the gentleman's agreement. I've heard that every once in a while there's, quote, a jackass that sort of comes through and sort of puts their crap, in the middle of the row, and then everybody's running over gear, and usually that sort of gets sorted out real quickly, not to do that. So that's kind of how they land. It's like that. The crab boats are typically who you'll see in the wintertime at night, the really bright orange lights. Everybody thinks there's a boat on fire. I think those are usually crabbers. So.
And why is it at night?
Oh, why is it at night? So other fisheries like shrimp and stuff will be at night, but there's no reason for you to be shrimping at night. You can. So usually like shrimpers and stuff will be out at night. Salmon trollers, tuna trollers too. They'll flip on all their deck lights so people know where they're at, and they'll go to sleep. These guys, because it's a derby fishery, so it's catch as much as you want while the season is open, mostly being the first 6 weeks or so. They're actively fishing at night because sleeping would cost you money when you're not working. So they're crabbing at night because they can, and because anytime you're not crabbing, you're not making money. Whereas in the shrimp fishery and things like that, it's not as much of a derby style fishery, and so they just sort of drift at night. Same with salmon and albacore. You can fish at night, you just don't really need to. So, good question. Other questions? All right. So moving on to, one last thing. This is a local boat, and that's a local boat. This one is, but I haven't seen it for a while. So all of these are boats that visitors could actually see. And that one's at 4.7, these two are 4.5. So. All right, so moving on to the trawl exhibit. We built this exhibit at the Seafood Oregon that helped funded it. After we opened this one, I don't even remember what other exhibit was here, but essentially the Trawl Commission, which is part of Seafood Oregon, said, well, hey, we have all these other species that we as trawlers fish for. We'd like to sort of continue talking to the public. So we want this space too. And so I had a student of mine at the time do some survey work on this exhibit to kind of find out what we were missing, like what visitors weren't understanding or getting. And sadly, what they weren't understanding or getting was that the industry, especially the trawl industry, wasn't regulated. Even though we have stuff about sustainability and how they're caught, people were walking away that there wasn't any management, especially when it came to net fisheries. Which my guess is something they carry in the door with them, not just from retailers, but that they carry
So you
in.
see, there's a couple documentaries out there from the 80s that talk about foreign fisheries just scooping up everything. So net fishing, people get that stuck in their head is that it's an unsustainable poor choice for everything.
And there's even some, ghost net stuff. There's even some educational facilities like now that still convey that message. And mostly it's a foreign fleet practice, foreign fleet problems, that you're giving that message out to U.S. consumers, which isn't necessarily an accurate view of U.S. trawlers. So this exhibit was really supposed to focus on management of the trawl fishing industry, and what's really, especially the trawlers that were funding this, had a really hard time with it. So the public perception is generally that the trawl industry isn't regulated, but the perception within the industry, within the trawl industry, is that they are over-regulated. they were like, what do you mean we're not regulated? Oh my God, you know, we got to do something about that. So this was our attempt at really looking at the regulatory process of the trout fishery, which was actually a really, really hard exhibit to do because that just sounds boring, right? I mean, like, let's do an exhibit on regulation. Yay! Okay. So the sections we tried to focus on here were that they're regulated on their gear. So this is sort of like the different gear. This is going to look different. This is just a prototype right now. But basically, we were trying to get at there's different types of nets. Not all nets are created equally. That you have excluders. That the foot rope, which is what's on the bottom of the net, is regulated, which essentially keeps them out of certain
it's
areas.
what we've got right here.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
it's going to actually attach to the counter. This is on the front leading edge of the net that touches the
Bottom leading edge.
And so as they hit rocks or anything, it rolls over this stuff. Large roller gear, small roller gear.
And it's also a lot of times regulated by nearshore fishery and offshore fishery. So nearshore environment, you have to use smaller roller gear. It's like a regulation. Offshore fisheries, you can use bigger roller gear, but even that's still regulated.
And
So.
in the past, before this regulation, the roller gear could be
Whatever size.
whatever. Could be truck tires if you wanted. And that starts to get hard on the bottom.
And it's not just the bottom, it's what you're dragging it over. So if you have big, I mean, it's just like your car. So I have a minivan. I'm not going to drive it over big rocks. It's not going to make it over. But if I had a monster truck, I could probably do that. It'd be okay. So it has to do with not necessarily what it does to the bottom, but what type of bottom you could take it over. And so the restriction on foot rope is basically keeping them out of reefs, of rocky reefs.
Where there are a lot of fish.
Yeah. And we have some offshore cold water corals and that kind of stuff that live there. So, anyways, roller here. Next thing we kind of tried to talk about is just sort of what is a trawler? Like, what does it do? What are the parts? So this is an actual trawler that kind of got made artsy, but this is a real boat, the Mizzou. So this is just, like I said, a dichotomy of sort of what a trawler is, how it works, all of that stuff, kind of a on land or in the visitor center dock walk. And then sort of the last panel there, which will look different when it's done, sort of about the other types of management. So that we manage by area. So you can't just fish anywhere. I mean, like legally, you can't fish anywhere. There is restricted areas. And specifically, there's restricted areas to trawl fishing. And this isn't new. This isn't about the marine protected areas that we just did in Oregon just a few years ago. We went through creating marine reserves. We actually already had marine reserves called the Rockfish Conservation Areas and Essential Fish Habitat, which we created like 10, 12 years ago. So we've already had some protected areas for a long time, which were specific to trawl fishing. Also talking about observers, which are basically government workers, a lot of times actually contractors of the government that are on the vessels. In the ground fish fishery, they have 100% observer coverage, meaning there is always someone from NOAA on your boat. They work alongside the crew, but they are not a member of the crew. So they don't get a share of the profit or anything like that. They're paid through taxpayer dollars through NOAA. And they're basically there taking biological information on what is caught. The big one, the individual transferable quotas, which, oh my God, we could have a whole exhibit just on that. We opted not to actually talk about it a whole lot in the exhibit, and instead we actually made a game, which will be on iPads right here, which allows people to actually fish for species. And through the process of doing that, they learn about the quota system. So the quota system is something that our trawl industry transitioned to in 2010 or 2011, I don't remember which year. And so in the past, the entire fleet had a quota of how much they could catch. So you can catch so much of species A, that's your target. Let's say it's the whiting fishery. You can catch so much whiting. We know that in the whiting fishery, you catch these bycatch species, you can catch so much of this as a fleet. If the fleet hit the bycatch quota first, they were done. They couldn't go back out and try to catch more of what they wanted to.
everybody
Everybody.
is benched.
Everybody's benched. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That was the old way. And the new way, every vessel has its own series of quota. It's called individual quota, individual fisher quota, or individual vessel quota. And so Mark has a set of quota. I do. Becca does. Each of you have your own individual
And we can
quota.
catch target. In fact, we've got quota for a whole lot of different fish. So I can choose to fish this, or this, or this, depending on my quota and kind of the market. So if I'm smart and a good businessman, I'm going to tune my gear up to go get this. Or I think it's going to be a good year for that, I'm going to buy yours.
Yeah.
And you're going to be able to then buy something. So everybody can kind of do commodity swapping with it.
Yeah.
It gives them a lot more control over what they're doing, and then they aren't beholden to, you could screw it up for me. I don't care anymore because I'm my own man now.
Yeah, and so if you get benched because you reach all your quota, that doesn't affect the rest of us unless you want to go buy more or lease or trade more quota, which, we'd have to decide that we wanted to do that. So it comes down to an individual. The other thing it kind of did, which is a hard concept for people to get, but something I always try to educate, is essentially now in those fisheries, there's really not bycatch anymore. Bycatch is when you're trying to catch species A, or one thing, and you're catching all these other things. In the past regulation, a lot of those other things were prohibited to go to market, so you had to dump them.
And
You
that's
couldn't
what
bring them
people
back.
became, that's what the
Yeah.
public notes as, that's an
Wasteful.
unconscionable process.
And part of what was really frustrating on the fishermen's end is that they had to do that. That was our federal regulation system. So even if you have that federal observer on board, they're making sure that you did that you dumped them.
This
They
is like asking a
couldn't-
farmer to burn a portion of their crop.
Yeah,
It
and
really
so
is
this
offensive.
was not them being wasteful. This was what the regulatory process was. So now in the new one, there essentially kind of isn't bycatch anymore because everything you catch, you can go to market. So you could be like, oh, I didn't want that, throw it over. You're essentially just taking money out of your pocket and like throwing it out. So now everything they catch in that quota can be sold.
As long as you're within your quota.
As long as you're.
There is some bycatch that gets sent to food share for the pantries. Where does that come
So that's two particular species. That's halibut and salmon mostly. That are what we call, they're still prohibited species. So the way those are managed is there's no legal take or legal market for them in the trawl fishery.
So if they're caught by a net, well, mostly by accident.
Yeah.
And the excluders actually, there's a salmon excluder that does a pretty nice job, but there could be a fish who just doesn't get a clue and doesn't get out.
Yeah, and salmon excluders, it's still experimental, so there's some clogging issues and stuff. They're working out. Sometimes the salmon sort of get all like schooly and they kind of don't know how to get out together. But so they're working on it. But so that bycatch will go to food share. And a lot of times food share will have scientific experiments that comes in. So if a lot of times the science community, when they do experimental tows to see what's in an area, they don't use excluders and they keep everything. And all of that will go to food share. But yeah, back to bycatch. So with the exception of salmon and halibut, pretty much everything else, all the different groundfish species, soles and rockfish, lingcod, sablefish, all of that, they're now accountable for in can market. We've also seen a lot of changes, or are seeing a lot of changes in the industries. There's a lot of people realizing that certain species, lingcod and sablefish being kind of the ones that fit mostly in the best category, they're worth a lot more money when they're not caught in a net.
Because the nets are hard on them.
Yeah.
The meat doesn't look good after it's been.
Yeah, and things get squished and things get bitten and whatever. So they're learning that there's higher value markets for those products when they're caught like in pots. And so there's a lot
They
of
have
fishermen.
sablefish pots like this
Yeah.
that are big that let those fish come in.
Yeah, and the quality's better. So there's a lot of fishermen trying to buy up or lease out other people's sablefish quota and then catching just that in pots and getting a higher value for it. So we're seeing a lot of it's interesting times in the
Cleverness.
trawl industry. And the good thing for consumers, if you want to tie it back to them, is you're seeing a lot of products, kind of nice whole fish and stuff, show up in the market that you didn't necessarily see show up in the market before. So like at Local Ocean, I'm seeing rockfish show up as pot-caught whole fish and things like that that you just didn't see before. So there's actually some benefits to consumers. You're going to start seeing some species that are now caught in pots and things like that that are going to do more direct sales. So that seems sort of exciting.
Katie?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So, just a question about the quotas. So
Yeah.
If I decided to declare myself a fisher, or I had a rowboat or something, could I get a quota and sell it to you?
You'd have to buy it. If you didn't have one, you'd have to buy your way in.
So there's kind of a grandfathered pool. And there's and yeah, so you would make a business decision to essentially buy someone out,
Okay.
buy their house, and then it's your house. Yeah.
You could just
Yeah.
declare yourself.
Yeah, you couldn't just, because they set that quota based on historical catch. So not all boats got it.
And if you're a shrimper in Oregon, let's say, are you required to use that excluder?
Yeah, you're required.
Cool.
That's a required one. There's some experimental excluders that aren't required yet. My guess is once they work out some problems, they will be.
Mhm.
They're still working on it.
This thing up above here is a tow signal. It's something they put out on a nets in the water, and it's up in the rigging usually, and it lets other boats know that you're towing something. And don't drive over it.
Yeah. Kind of like if any of you are water skiers, and when you have a water skier down, you have the flag,
Mm-hmm.
that you put up. It's that for other boats to know that
So
you
nets
have.
in the water, pretty much, is what that means.
Yeah, something behind me. Other pieces of this real quick, stock assessments. Basically, a science community goes out and tries to figure out how much of the species they think there is off our coast, and then through that they come up with how much can be caught. So there is some biological data collection. It's a lot of what the observers do. They also tow nets for certain areas, and then they basically come up with a mathematical model of what they think would be a sustainable harvest. And from that larger number is how they come up with the quota. So the quota is not the same every year. It's based on those stock assessments. Your percent is essentially the same, but the numbers are going to move around. Vessel monitoring system. Each vessel has a vessel locator called a VMS. The fishermen call them eco bracelets. So their vessel, and this is at the trawl fisheries, so that basically management agencies like NOAA knows where that vessel is at. It's essentially to make sure they're not in restricted areas.
There will be a computer attached to this exhibit here pretty quick that has that system. And people can do it at home. You can look up marine traffic or ship tracker and see the whole fleet out there driving around real time.
Yeah, and I will mention one of the things I was worried about is when we have that up there, and we're going to have, the restricted areas mapped out, people are going to see boats in restricted areas, and I don't want them to freak out about that. So you can be in a
Tell you, the
restricted area.
volunteers, call 911 immediately.
You can be in a restricted area, so you're going to see boats in them all the time. It could be a boat transitioning through the restricted area, just driving through. It could be some other type of boat other than a fishing boat. Could be a research boat. Could be them doing other types of fishing activity like crabbing or something, which is allowed. So just because you see one in there doesn't mean they're being illegal. So, logbook, I don't like where it's out on the panel, so we're actually going to have a logbook out. It's a paper one, although now they do it all electronically. It's simply them calculating out their trip, where they fished, how many tows they did, how long their tows were, how fast they went, that kind of stuff. And those are just some pieces of the management system. There's a whole lot we're not mentioning on here. And like I said, this should be done in the next month or two. It should be up and going.
Panels are off to print, so we'll have all the final stuff. So iPad games, we had one round out here for a little bit, and then we found some errors in them, so they're back out.
Yeah. So, and these will be up here.
Yeah,
So-
Sarah from the net shop's going to bring the guys over, and they're going to tie them into our holes here. It should be kind of fun.
So, questions about any of that?
Oh, the footage here. This footage, this will be up.
Sarah's?
Yeah,
Yeah, this is
this
Sarah's
is all the underwater cameras that she's been doing all that research on. So we've got a couple interesting loops, salmon, halibut. There's a sea lion in there that visits for a minute.
And this is an excluder. You just saw halibut kind of go through there. So this is one of the ones that they're still working on, you know, so it's not 100% yet, but this is like research and action. So